Good morning. I'm Dr. Claudia Thomas, orthopedic surgeon, and I would like to thank you for joining me this morning on my premier Facebook Live presentation. Today's topic is recognize your talents. The meaning of talents has changed over the years. In modern times, we consider it to be a skill, something special that you may be able to do that other people don't do as well or don't do at all. And it reflects your natural ability. If we go back to biblical times, we can refer to a parable of talents, which is in Matthew 25, 14 through 30. You may be familiar with this parable if you are a churchgoer or if you study the Bible on your own. And the parable states that a master, a lord, and it doesn't mean the Lord, it's like a lord in ancient times who had servants. A lord gave three of his servants a different set of talents. One, he gave 5 talents. Another, he gave 2 talents. And the third, he gave 1 talent. The man who got 5 talents traded and grew those talents and doubled them into 10 talents. And his Lord was very pleased. The man who got 2 talents also traded and doubled his into 4 talents. And his Lord was very pleased. The third dug a hole in the ground and buried his 1 talent that he had been given, and that talent stayed there. When the Lord reviewed what the one person had done with his talent, he was very disappointed that the talent had not been developed. We all have talents, and that's a given, that's a promised. Each of us has a talent. Some of us may have more than one, but there's something that we do exceptionally well. And those talents are to be developed and shared and grown. When that happens, there is success. When I was a child, I used to draw on the walls. Fortunately, not the walls in the house, but the walls in our garage. We had a cinder block garage, and I found some charcoal and I started drawing pictures. I can still visualize the pictures today. I drew an elephant in my rendition of an elephant. It was not great art. It was not master art, but it was a child's version of an elephant. And from there, I continued to draw. And drawing and art were talents of mine that became evident as I aged, as I became older. Fortunately, my parents saw that I had a particular talent for art, and they made sure that that talent was nurtured. In New York City, where I grew up, there were specialized high schools depending upon your abilities. Bronx High School Science, Boys High, Stuyvesant, the Hunter College elementary school system. And I was fortunate enough to apply to and be accepted to the High School of Music and Art in Manhattan, where my artistic talents grew. When I went to further my education, I found out that I had a talent for writing. Thus, my autobiography has been published, God Spare Life. And I completed writing a rather extensive book, over 350 pages. But I had to have some knowledge of English and grammar, and I had to have writing skills in order to do that. So writing was another talent. Mathematics was perhaps the talent that I am most proud of. I recall coming home very excited with a math paper in the 4th grade, and it was a test I had taken that I had gotten a 99 on. I showed it to my mother. I said, "Look, Mommy, I got a 99 in math." And she said, "Oh, that's good, baby. Show it to your dad when he gets home." And I could not wait for Daddy to get home. You see, Daddy was the mathematician of the family. He kept our books, and he kept, that's what we call a strong box, in the hamper with his ledgers and calculations in that box. And he calculated the math for the family household. He did the finances with pencil and paper. I remember that once he caught the bank in an error, and he took his crude ledger down to the bank and showed them the ledger, and his addition and subtraction and equations were compared to the bank's records. And Daddy was correct. He had caught the bank in an error, and they had to refund him the difference of the money. So he was the mathematician of the family. I could not wait for Daddy to get home. And Daddy got home, and I ran and showed him this 99 I had gotten on the math test. And Daddy was generally a jolly person. He laughed a lot. He smiled a lot. He made jokes. But he looked at that 99 and furrowed his brow and said, "What happened to the other point?" Well, I was devastated. But according to Daddy, if I could get a 99, I could get 100. Those were his expectations. So that was the standard by which I began to practice math to get perfect scores. And this continued throughout elementary school and junior high and high school, with geometry being my favorite subject. The problem solving and the calculations and the mathematics were things that excited me. In fact, my love of geometry was so extensive that over the summer, I went to one of the boys' high schools in the specialized system because music and art did not have advanced math, and I took solid geometry because I enjoyed it so much. It was also early in my life that I realized that going to school was easier than working, taking a job. But I enjoyed taking math over the summer and developing my skills. So I implore you to find out what your talents are and develop them. When I went to college, I was accepted to an elite female college. It has since gone co-ed, but I was accepted to Vassar College in upstate New York. And with the New York State Regents scholarship money that I had earned and the national scholarships I had also earned, I was able to afford to attend this very elite school using scholarships. That's where math became very complex. It was no longer the geometry that I loved so much, and that kind of problem solving. Advanced math was very abstract. There was a lot of theory and a lot of formulas, and there were things that were not proved. And math began to wear on me. I said, "Oh, this isn't the math I love, the problem solving and getting the answer right." So I held on as long as I could, but in my junior year, I changed my major from mathematics to Black Studies. And Black Studies was possible because the Black students at Vassar College had demanded an accredited Black Studies department with other things that we needed in the schools, such as Black faculty, Black mentors. And so it was possible when I became a senior to major in Black studies and to have that as my graduate experience. I still had a love of math, and so my senior project was to combine a research project with mathematics. I tested over 200 Poughkeepsie residents for sickle cell anemia, and I did the statistics of those patients and developed the frequency, all the intimate details of the incidence of sickle cell anemia in Poughkeepsie, New York. That was my senior thesis. Medicine seemed interesting to me, and I was inspired to apply to medical school by two African-American women who were a year ahead of me, who were med school bound. We didn't have a pre-med major at Vassar, but I said, medicine sounds interesting, particularly surgery, because my mother had taught me to sew when I was 7 years old. And that was another talent that I had that had been nurtured at home. So I said, let me look into medical school and see what surgery involves and if I can be a surgeon. I applied to medical school and I applied to Johns Hopkins, was accepted. And I got to see some surgery. Surgery was horrible. General surgery, back in that day, this was in the 1970s. I recall a large surgeon of tremendous girth sitting on a stool doing a crude mastectomy on a woman. And as fast as he could cut her breast off, blood spurted everywhere, and he yelled at his residents who were assisting him, "You're going to let her bleed out? Get that suction and suck the blood away." You know, it was just crude. It was gross. It was uncaring. And I said to myself, well, I can't spend a whole lifetime with people of this temperament. So I was getting discouraged because I wanted to be a surgeon. One day I got a chance to see some orthopedic surgery. I didn't know what orthopedics was. I wasn't familiar with the term, but orthopedics means straight ortho, child, pedic. So I rotated on orthopedics, and my first day, the chief resident, who was my superior, rather than yelling at me in a harsh voice and telling me to get his back out of the way as far as possible, said, well, why don't you scrub in? Now, this showed to me someone who enjoyed what they were doing enough to invite me to join them in the operating room. So I rubbed my hands, and for the requisite period of time, and I was put into gown and gloves and sterile and quiet, and I was brought up to the table. The case that the orthopedic surgeons were doing was one on a young man who had something called slipped capital femoral epiphysis. And what this meant was that the ball and socket area of his femur, the long bone in your thigh, were not aligned. Before we finished growing, the growth line where the bone grows from is cartilage in here. That is cartilage. It fuses into solid bone after we finish growing. But as long as it is cartilage, the bone can slip out of place. And his bone had slipped out of place. Our job was to bring it back to where it was supposed to be. Well, how do you do that? You calculate what kind of angle you have to cut in the bone so that when you bring the bone together, it's back at its normal angle. Solid geometry. I was so excited. It was solid geometry and surgery, and orthopedic surgery. And not only was the concept clear to me, but they let me put a screw in the hole that they had made. There was this plate that was going to hold everything together. And they gave me the screwdriver, and I was able to put a screw through bone through the plate to hold everything. I was in heaven. I had found my niche. Now, my carpentry skills were something that I learned from my dad. In New York, a lot of the houses have unfinished basements that are either cement or cinder block. And my father, being a handyman, doing man things, which I think some of our young men have forgotten how to do, but doing manual things and trying to teach us, my sister and my mom and I, how to work with him. Well, he lost my sister and my mom in that project, but I was right there with him when he finished our basement and put up knotty pine. It taught me how to drop a plumb line, how to use a saw, screwdriver, make holes in the wood with drills. So I was familiar with the tools of carpentry, thanks to my father. He taught me carpentry, and he taught me orthopedics. Because when I went in that operating room, the tools were the same that Daddy had. So I wasn't afraid to put that screw in the bone. I was elated, excited, and I loved it. I found that I had a talent for orthopedics, which combined my math skills, the geometry, the solid geometry, and my carpentry skills, and art. Reforming something that is broken or deformed and holding it with screws and plates. Well, I told my chief resident, hey, I like this stuff. I love orthopedics, but guess what? I saw no women doing orthopedic surgery. Of the thousands of orthopedic surgeons in the country, there were perhaps 25 women practicing this art. And my chief resident didn't discourage me. He said to me, there's no reason you can't do this. And that was all the encouragement I needed. So I applied to orthopedic training programs. Every place I applied to was unfamiliar with having women in their program. They had never trained a woman. Not to mention a woman who looked like me, who had a huge afro and was of a different culture. But I applied and I got into Yale. And that's where I trained and so enhanced my orthopedic skills. The residency program was 5 years. This is after medical school. And at the end of those 5 years, in 1980, I graduated from the Yale Orthopedic Surgery program. At that time, Dr. Charles Epps, some of you may know the name, was chairman of orthopedics at Howard University. And at one of the national meetings, he advised me, you're the first Black woman in the country to become an orthopedic surgeon. This is something I didn't know. This was not something I had set out to accomplish, to make a name for myself. I didn't know until Dr. Epps told me. He said, you are the first. And I said, well, I damn sure won't be the last. I'm very pleased to say that from me being the first in 1980, there are now over 100 women of color who are orthopedic surgeons. So developing your God-given talents can take you to places that have never been seen before. It is key that you reach back and you bring other people with you. Keep that door open. Don't be the first and last. There's no pride in that. So this is my legacy. And I have gone on to enjoy this specialty. I love orthopedics. And I encourage young people to consider it as a career. It's still dominated by white males, but that doesn't mean you can't break through. And people are still breaking through the barriers. So share your talents. Share your talents with others and become a legacy. But you have to first recognize those talents. And it's also important that you have opportunity. An opportunity may not be something that comes naturally. People may have to recognize you and who you are and afford you the opportunity to apply to this program, to study here, to study there, to enhance your skills and talents. But this must be done not only for us as we grow, but for children. They have talents too, and their little talents show through. And when you see that they're good at something or they're trying something and they like it, well, you got to enhance that talent and bring them along. Each one teach one. As a child, I had a female pediatrician. I told you I was from New York. I'm from Jamaica, New York. And my pediatrician was Dr. Pearl Foster, a Black woman. And when I went to her office, she was well postured. She wore that white starched coat like a pro. And she was someone to be respected. Had I not seen that image in my childhood, I may never have thought that I could become a doctor. But thank God I had this image that inspired me and said, you can do what I do. You can be here too. So that is part of my story. And I will leave you with a saying that my mother had. She had a lot of sayings. But one thing she said about opportunity is that opportunity knocks on many doors, but it's never been known to pick the lock. Thank you for your attention. And I will take questions at this time. Okay, one question that has come through has been about how do you translate talents into community organizations that are functional? My answer is that you might have a group of people who have diverse abilities, but together they can form a tremendous force, a mighty force. One may be good at writing because grants and proposals have to be written and they have to be written in a special way. Another may be good at the mathematics that you will need in such an organization, and they can help with the accounting. Another one may be just an organizer who knows how to pull people together and keep them together. But how well your group does will depend upon the various talents of the people who comprise that group, and they're working together. And I don't see chat. Oh, here we are. This is someone who is wondering, whether I was inspired in art by our famous ancestors. And I'm not familiar with this artist, Robert Scott. I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly. Duncanson. No, I was not familiar with this artist, but my grandfather was an artist. This is something I found out later in my life, in my ancestry, that my grandfather was an artist. He painted American landscapes. And even though I did not know that at the time, there's something in genealogy that passes on the traits of your ancestors. You want to know why you do a certain thing a certain way, and somebody will tell you, well, your grand aunt Betty used to do it like that. And you never met Aunt Betty, and you don't know much about her, but somehow you have that trait. Other questions? How and where do you find mentors? I don't care if you're good at shining shoes. You need to teach someone else to do that. Mentorship is critical. And we not only need to have mentors find us, we have to find them and recognize them. I've had youngsters ask me would I mentor them, and I say, sure. And I recognize that what they want to do has value, and I encourage them to do it. But you need to share your talents as a mentor. Mentorship is very, very important. Sometimes mentors find me. I was visiting a university, and I knew some of the people on the staff, and I was there to talk, but they pulled me aside and said, we would like you to speak to a young lady who's been having a hard time. Somebody called her a name, and this upset her so terribly that she was in counseling. I'm still mentoring that young lady several years later as to how one deals with the misogyny in certain areas, particularly in orthopedics, and how you do it without losing yourself, but maintaining your pride and pursuing the field that is worth pursuing. Question of why did I choose to practice in Florida? I was at Hopkins on the faculty, and one of my former mentees, who is in orthopedics because of me, had gone into private practice in Florida and needed help. He called once, he called twice, he called 3 times. And I kept telling him, oh, I'm at Johns Hopkins, you don't leave Hopkins. But the third time I came down to Florida and had a look at the possibilities in this particular community. It's a big retirement community. Orthopedic surgery is something that's very competitive. But when you're good and people get the word out, and word of mouth goes out, and you don't even have to advertise because people heard about you, well, that's a good thing. And this huge retirement community of over 100,000 people heard about this practice and would come in droves. So I said, well, this is a potentially good situation. And I did leave Johns Hopkins, left Baltimore, and made my life down here in Florida. That was more than 20 years ago. And I've had no regrets. And I have a thank you. You're very, very welcome. I appreciate my audience tuning in. And I will be on Facebook Live again. We were scheduling a meeting, if you will, a conversation with me on February 18th, which is Tuesday, same time, 8:30 in the morning. I hope this agrees with you and your schedule before the day gets too busy. And it will be on other topics that have touched my life and which I hope will help you in your quest and in your future. Thank you very much.
Claudia Thomas changed the face of orthopedics. Dr. Thomas became the first female African-American board-certified orthopedic surgeon in the United States. She was a leader in mentoring and bringing more African-American medical students into orthopedics. This trailblazer's journey began in New York. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Queens by her parents, Charles and Daisy Thomas. Although denied higher education themselves, her parents stressed the importance of education to their daughters, Catherine and Claudia.
She was always a good student. Our parents emphasized education, so of course we knew what was expected. And our parents had the foresight to recognize that we were talented as children, and they fed those talents. I'm sure they were thinking, as African Americans, this was one of the ways that we could advance ourselves, and that was through education.
Dr. Thomas excelled as a student, creating her opportunities. She attended the High School of Music and Art in New York City. Her high test scores earned her a National Merit Scholarship and the New York Regent Scholarship to attend Vassar College. It was at Vassar that Dr. Thomas became an activist. After the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., she helped form the Students Afro-American Society, SAS, on campus. Because of Vassar's limited number of Black students and Black curriculum, Dr. Thomas and others in SAS demanded that the college expand Black studies into a degree-granting department and increase the number of Black professors. When the administration refused, Dr. Thomas and several other members of SAS staged a protest and took over the college's main building. That takeover lasted 3 days until the college finally agreed to the creation of a Black Studies major and a commitment to hire more Black professors. It became the model for Black Studies programs around the nation.
This was important because we were in the midst of the Civil Rights era. Everyone's consciousness was being raised by the leadership of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We saw it as our responsibility to join in those efforts to enhance the rights of our people.
Dr. Thomas graduated with honors from Vassar College as a Black Studies major and moved on to new challenges at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Although Dr. Thomas faced unconscious bias and racism, she persevered, excelled, and graduated with honors. Her graduation from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in May of 1975 was a family celebration. Dr. Thomas's academic excellence at Hopkins attracted the attention of Dr. Wayne Southwick, who was chairman of Yale University's Orthopedic Resident Training Program. He recognized Dr. Thomas's talent and accepted her into their residency program. Although not the first person of color to train in orthopedics at Yale, she would be the first African-American woman to be admitted into the Yale residency program in orthopedic surgery. After finishing her residency at Yale, Dr. Thomas completed a fellowship at the Shock Trauma Center at the University of Maryland, one of the top trauma centers in the U.S. In 1981, She returned to serve as assistant professor of orthopedic surgery at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. On the faculty at Hopkins from 1981 until 1994, Dr. Thomas recruited the largest number of minorities and women to train in orthopedics at Hopkins. In 2004, Dr. Thomas left Hopkins and joined a private practice, the Tri-County Orthopedic Center in Leesburg, Florida. In Florida, she continued to mentor young girls and boys. In 2008, Dr. Thomas was awarded the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons Diversity Award for her efforts in improving diversity within her field and for mentoring so many young men and women.
Dr. Claudia Thomas is a trailblazer in the field of medicine. She is the first female physician of African descent to complete residency training in orthopedic surgery and to be certified by the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery. Her life has been an example of career preparation, the highest level of professional performance, and a deep sense of responsibility to pave the way for others to succeed.
That's a mouthful of compliments, a mouthful of words. But what it meant is that this lady was a pioneer. She was a groundbreaker. She had the qualities and broke down barriers that were very, very difficult to do. I consider her to be someone who I stood on the shoulders of. She was a giant. And people, behind her may or may not recognize how much she's done to allow them to succeed in orthopedic surgery.
She, I'm sure, inspired others and gained the respect of people who didn't know that African American women could be good orthopedic surgeons and contribute as professional orthopedic surgeons as well as anyone else. And people who had conscious or unconscious doubts about that had an opportunity to be educated by seeing a three-dimensional, real-world, living, working orthopedic surgeon who did what she was doing.
Simply put, Dr. Claudia L. Thomas is unique because she's A, a pioneer, B, a unicorn, and the antithesis of what an orthopedic surgeon was slated to be. She turned that paradigm on its head, and over the past 5 decades has proven that she actually is what an orthopedic surgeon can be, should be, and is capable of being. That opened the door for all of us.
She worked particularly hard while she was at Hopkins to increase the not only women but Black women, and it's very important because it was difficult as a female to get into orthopedic residencies. Many programs were very hesitant to have anything besides white males in their program, and the diversity, as with all things, really helps everyone.
Dr. Thomas is amazing. She's selfless. She's endured so much, but always has thrived and succeeded, and always brings along with her others, whether it's in orthopedics or in her community or nationally.
She is so special because she has always had some health challenges during her life that she has overcome and that she uses as a reason to care for others. Her empathy shines through at all times.
I would say that she is one of the kindest people I know. She also was extremely skilled technically.
I think that Dr. Thomas has such a unique presence. It's hard to explain, but when she's around, she's around. You can feel the room fill with kindness. She provides a smile. She provides support. She's just an incredible, talented orthopedic surgeon and an outstanding, awesome person.
I consider it a privilege and a pleasure to have had her as a friend, and it's been tremendously gratifying to see the contributions that she's made. And I think she's a wonderful role model.
She modeled for me what giving and supporting the next generation of surgeons looks like by investing in me, by showing up for me, by answering my questions, my calls, editing my personal statement. She showed a commitment and offered herself as a support mechanism. And she was the only person that supported me in that way at that time. So because of that, I replicated her actions through interventions and the other work that I've done over the years. I attribute that to her.
So she's been influencing people for over 30 years. So what's 30 times a million? I mean, once you teach one person to fix, then doesn't that help the whole village? So I would say that Dr. Thomas has led and influenced the entire orthopedic community, and her reach, impact is unmeasurable, actually.
In honor of Dr. Thomas's lifetime pursuit of excellence in education, for her leadership in recruiting more minorities and women into orthopedics, and for her tireless efforts in changing the face of orthopedic surgery in the United States, we have established the Claudia L. Thomas MD Award. Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for being a role model.
Good afternoon. Thank you for establishing the Dr. Claudia L. Thomas Award in my honor. Our first recipient embodies the grit, determination, and academic excellence that are the pillars of